On my birthday, my sister handed me a DNA test and laughed. She said I wasn't really family, just another man's mistake. Everyone else laughed too, until the results came back. Because the truth didn't just prove her wrong, it destroyed everything she thought she knew. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to Storyflow Diaries. I used to believe that no matter how complicated life got, family was supposed to be the one place where you didn't have to prove your worth. I held on to that belief for most of my life, even when small cracks started to show, even when the jokes got sharper and the looks lingered a little too long. I told myself it was harmless, that people didn't always mean what they said, that love could exist in strange, imperfect ways. But I never imagined that on my birthday, the one day that's supposed to remind you that you matter, I would be reduced to a punchline. It was my 23rd birthday. Nothing big, nothing extravagant, just a small gathering at my parents' house. The same house I grew up in, the same dining table where we had shared countless meals, arguments, and quiet moments that stitched us together as a family. Or at least that's what I thought. The house smelled like vanilla cake and fried snacks. My mom had been in the kitchen all morning, humming softly like she always did when she was trying to keep things normal. My dad sat in his usual chair, flipping through the news on his phone, barely looking up. And my sister Nadia was already there, scrolling through hers with that familiar smirk on her face. Nadia had always been difficult. Not in a loud, obvious way. She didn't scream or throw things. Her kind of cruelty was quieter, sharper. The kind that slipped into conversations disguised as jokes, so if you ever reacted, you looked like the problem. Growing up, she used to say things like, "Are you sure you belong here?" with a laugh that made everyone else laugh too. I'd laugh along even when something inside me tightened, because what else was I supposed to do? I was the younger sibling, the sensitive one, the one who wasn't supposed to make things awkward. Over time, I got used to it, or at least I thought I did. That day, everything started off almost normal. We sat around the table, eating, talking about random things. My mom asked about my job. My dad nodded absent-mindedly, and Nadia made a few harmless comments about how I still hadn't figured out my life yet. I brushed it off. I always did. Then it was time for the cake. My mom lit the candles, her face glowing in that soft, hopeful way. "Make a wish," she said, smiling like she meant it. For a moment, I almost believed her. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and wished for something simple. Peace, just a little bit of peace in this family. I blew out the candles. Everyone clapped, even Nadia. And then she said, "Wait, I have a gift." There was something in her voice that made my stomach twist. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't warmth. It was anticipation, like she was waiting for something. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small rectangular box. It was neatly wrapped, but not in a thoughtful way, more like she had done it quickly, just enough to make it presentable. She slid it across the table toward me. "Go on," she said, leaning back in her chair, arms crossed. "Open it." I hesitated for a second. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me already knew this wasn't going to be a normal gift. Still, everyone was watching, so I forced a smile and started unwrapping it. The paper came off easily. Inside was a plain white box with bold letters printed across the top. A DNA test kit. For a second, I didn't understand. My brain just froze trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Then Nadia laughed. Not a soft laugh, not a playful one, a sharp, cutting laugh that filled the room. thought it might help clear things up," she said, her eyes locked on mine. I looked up slowly, my chest tightening. "What is this?" She tilted her head like she was amused by my confusion. "Come on, you've never wondered?" she said. "You don't look like any of us. You don't act like us. It's kind of obvious, isn't it?" The room went quiet. I could feel my heart in my ears. "Nadia," my mom said softly, but there was no real warning in her voice, no urgency, just discomfort. But Nadia didn't stop. "I mean, let's be honest," she continued, shrugging casually. "You're probably just another man's mistake." The words landed like something heavy and unmovable. Another man's mistake. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, irreversible break. I looked around the table. My dad didn't say anything. He didn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the table, like if he stayed still enough, this moment would pass without involving him. My mom looked torn, her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. And then, to my shock, I heard a small chuckle. It came from my cousin sitting off to the side. He quickly covered his mouth, but the damage had already been done. That was the moment I realized something that hurt more than Nadia's words. This wasn't new. This wasn't just a joke she came up with on the spot. This was something that had been thought about, talked about, maybe even believed. My fingers tightened around the box. "You think this is funny?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. Nadia shrugged again. "Relax, it's just a joke, unless you're scared of what it might say." There it was, the trap. If I got upset, I was overreacting. If I refused, I looked guilty. If I played along, I was accepting the insult. I felt my throat burn, but I swallowed it down. Because in that moment, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about a test. This was about humiliation, and she wanted an audience. I took a slow breath and placed the box back on the table. "I'm not doing this," I said. Nadia leaned forward slightly, her smile fading just a bit. "Wow, sensitive as always." I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping against the floor louder than I intended. "I'm going home," I said. My mom finally spoke up. "You are home," she said, her voice almost pleading. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Avoidance. She knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the truth, but she knew enough to not be surprised. "I don't think I am," I replied quietly. No one stopped me as I walked out. Not Nadia, not my dad, not even my mom. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but it felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at my phone. My mind kept replaying her words over and over. Another man's mistake. I wanted to ignore it, to bury it like I had buried every other comment she'd ever made. But this time, it was different, because deep down, something had shifted. A question had been planted, and no matter how much I tried, I couldn't ignore it anymore. By midnight, I made a decision. If they wanted the truth so badly, I was going to find it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on me like it had weight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nadia's face, her smirk, the way she leaned back in her chair like she had just delivered the perfect punchline. And behind that, something worse, the silence of everyone else. That silence kept echoing louder than her words. Because jokes are only funny when everyone knows they're not true. But no one had rushed to say she was wrong. Not my dad, not my mom, not a single person at that table. Around 2 a.m., I got up and turned on the small lamp in the corner of my room. The light felt harsh, almost accusing, like it was forcing me to face something I had avoided my entire life. I walked to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. I don't know how long I stayed there, long enough to notice things I had always brushed off. My skin tone was slightly darker than both my parents'. My features didn't quite match theirs. My dad had sharp, narrow eyes. Mine were rounder. My mom had a small nose. Mine wasn't. Growing up, people used to say things like, "Oh, you must take after some distant relative," or "Genetics can be funny like that." And I accepted it. I wanted to accept it. But now, I wasn't so sure. I leaned closer to the mirror, studying my own face like I was looking at a stranger. "Who are you?" I whispered. The question felt heavier than it should have. I stepped back, shaking my head, trying to clear it. I didn't want to spiral. I didn't want to become paranoid over something that might just be cruelty wrapped in a joke. But then again, what if it wasn't? By morning, I had made up my mind. I grabbed my keys, got dressed, and left my apartment without overthinking it. The store wasn't far, just a small pharmacy a few streets away. I had passed it hundreds of times before without ever imagining I'd walk in for something like this. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside. The place smelled faintly of antiseptic and plastic packaging. Shelves lined with medicine, vitamins, and random health products stretched out in neat rows. It felt ordinary, too ordinary for something that suddenly felt so life-changing. I walked straight to the counter. The woman behind it looked up and gave me a polite smile. "Can I help you?" For a moment, I hesitated. The words caught in my throat. It felt strange, almost embarrassing to say it out loud. But I forced myself. "Do you have DNA test kits?" She didn't react. No surprise, no curiosity, just a simple nod as she reached under the counter and pulled out a small box. "Here you go," she said, placing it in front of me. It looked almost identical to the one Nadia had given me. My stomach twisted. "How much?" I asked. She told me the price. I paid without thinking twice. As I walked out of the store, the small box felt heavier than it should have in my hand. This was it. The thing that could either prove Nadia wrong or confirm something I wasn't ready to face. Back at my apartment, I placed the box on the table and just stared at it. For a long time, I didn't open it, because as long as it stayed closed, everything was still uncertain. And uncertainty, as painful as it was, felt safer than the truth. But eventually, I sat down, took a deep breath, and opened it. The instructions were simple, too simple for something that carried this much weight. Swab your cheek, seal the sample, send it back. That was it. No warning about how it might change your life, no preparation for what comes after. I followed the steps slowly, almost mechanically. My hands felt steady, but inside, I was anything but calm. When I sealed the sample and placed it back in the box, I felt something shift inside me. It was done. There was no going back now. I dropped it off later that afternoon. The woman at the counter didn't know she was holding something that could unravel an entire family. To her, it was just another package. To me, it was everything. The next few days felt strange, like I was living in between two versions of reality. In one version, nothing had changed. My family was my family, Nadia was just being cruel like she always was, and this whole thing would come back as nothing more than proof that I had wasted my time. In the other version, everything was a lie, and I didn't know which one was worse. I avoided my parents' house. My mom called once, her voice cautious. "Are you okay?" she asked. I almost laughed at the question. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone neutral. There was a pause. "You didn't have to leave like that," she said softly. I clenched my jaw. Did I? Another pause. "I'll talk to Nadia," she added quickly, like that would fix something. But I knew it wouldn't, because this wasn't about Nadia anymore. "Okay," I replied, even though I didn't mean it. We hung up shortly after. My dad didn't call at all. That didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was how much that silence hurt. Days passed, then a week. Every morning I checked my email before even getting mad at it. Every notification made my heart race, only to drop again when it wasn't what I was waiting for. At night, I found myself replaying childhood memories, looking for clues, moments that didn't make sense, times when relatives would give me strange looks, times when Nadia would say things that felt too specific to be random. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle without knowing what the final picture was supposed to look like. And the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Because if there was a truth hidden in all of this, it had been buried for a long time. And not just by Nadia, by everyone. On the 10th day, the email finally came. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone when I saw the notification. My heart stopped. For a second, I couldn't move. This was it. The moment everything would either fall apart or stay the same. My fingers hovered over the screen. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Part of me wanted to open it immediately. The other part wanted to throw my phone across the room and pretend it didn't exist. Because once I saw those results, there was no undoing it, no going back to the version of myself who didn't know. I took a deep breath. "Just do it," I whispered. And then I tapped the screen. The screen loaded slower than it probably actually did, but in that moment, every second stretched out until it felt unbearable. My eyes scanned the page too quickly at first, missing the words that mattered, until I forced myself to slow down, to actually read what was in front of me. And then I saw it. Not a match. I blinked, certain I had misunderstood. My eyes moved back to the line again, reading it more carefully this time, as if precision would somehow change the outcome. No biological relationship detected. My chest tightened. For a second, I just stared at the words, waiting for them to rearrange themselves into something else, something less final, something that made sense. But they didn't. The air in the room felt heavier, like it had been sucked out and replaced with something I couldn't breathe properly in. I put my phone down slowly, my hand trembling despite my effort to stay still. This wasn't possible. Or maybe it was. Maybe that was the worst part. Because deep down, I had already prepared myself for this answer. I just didn't think it would hurt this much. I stood up abruptly, pacing the small space of my apartment like movement would help me process what I had just read. My thoughts felt scattered, crashing into each other without forming anything clear. Not a match. What did that even mean for me? For my life? For everything I thought I knew? I grabbed my phone again, my hands moving almost on instinct, scrolling through the report for more details. Maybe there was something I had missed, some explanation buried in the fine print. But there wasn't. It was clear, direct, unforgiving. I wasn't biologically related to the people I had called my family my entire life. A hollow laugh escaped my throat before I could stop it. So she was right, I muttered to myself, the words tasting bitter. Another man's mistake. That phrase came back, louder now, heavier. But this time, it didn't feel like a joke. I sank down onto the couch, my mind replaying every moment from my childhood through a completely different lens. The comments, the looks, the subtle distance. All of it suddenly made sense in a way I never wanted it to. I thought about my dad, how he had always been distant, never openly cruel, but never truly warm either. I had convinced myself that was just his personality, that he was like that with everyone. But now, I wasn't so sure. I thought about my mom, how she loved me, or at least how I believed she did, the way she would cook my favorite meals, check in on me, worry about small things. Was that love real? Or was it something else? Something layered with guilt? And then there was Nadia. Her words didn't feel random anymore. They felt deliberate, like she had known something I didn't, or at least suspected it strongly enough to turn it into a weapon. My grip tightened around my phone. I needed answers, not guesses, not assumptions, the truth. I didn't even remember deciding to leave my apartment, but the next thing I knew, I was already outside, my keys in my hand, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and something deeper, something more fragile. Fear. The drive to my parents' house felt shorter than usual, or maybe I was just too lost in my thoughts to notice the time passing. Every red light felt like an obstacle. Every second felt wasted. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my chest was tight, my breathing uneven. The house looked exactly the same, unchanged, like nothing inside it could possibly explain what I had just learned. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. This door I had walked through thousands of times, as a child, as a teenager, as someone who believed he belonged there. I swallowed hard and stepped out. My hand hesitated for just a second before knocking. It didn't take long for the door to open. My mom stood there, her expression shifting instantly from mild surprise to something more tense when she saw me. "You're here," she said, her voice soft but uncertain. I didn't return the greeting. "Can we talk?" I asked. She nodded quickly, stepping aside to let me in. The familiar scent of the house hit me immediately, but instead of comfort, it made my stomach twist. Everything felt wrong, like I was standing in a place that looked like home, but no longer felt like it. "Your dad's in the living room," she said, closing the door behind me. Of course he was. I walked past her without another word. He was exactly where she said he would be, sitting in his usual chair, the TV playing something in the background that he wasn't really watching. He looked up as I entered. For a brief moment, our eyes met. And in that moment, I saw it. Not confusion, not curiosity, recognition, like he already knew why I was there. I held up my phone, the screen still displaying the results. "This," I said, my voice tighter than I intended, "is not a joke." Silence filled the room. My mom hovered near the doorway, her hands clasped tightly together. My dad didn't move, didn't say anything, didn't even look surprised. And that was the moment everything inside me shifted from confusion to something sharper. "You knew," I said, the realization hitting me like a wave. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. My dad exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair like the weight of something long buried had finally caught up to him. "It's not that simple," he said. I let out a hollow laugh. "It's not that simple?" I repeated. "I just found out I'm not your son, and you're telling me it's not that simple?" My voice rose despite my effort to keep it steady. My mom stepped forward slightly. "Please, just—" "No," I cut her off, turning toward her. "No, not right now." She froze. I turned back to my dad. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you known?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. Since the beginning, he admitted quietly. The words landed harder than anything Nadia had said. Since the beginning, I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. So my entire life, I started, my voice cracking slightly despite my effort to control it. You knew I wasn't yours? He didn't deny it. And you just, what, pretended? Let me grow up thinking I was part of this family? It was complicated, he said again, but this time his voice carried something else. Regret. Or maybe just exhaustion. I shook my head, stepping back like I needed physical distance from the conversation. Then explain it, I said, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. Because right now, the only thing that makes sense is that I've been lied to my entire life. My mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. We were trying to protect you. I looked at her, my chest tightening. Protect me? From what? The truth? Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel comforted by it. If anything, it made it worse, because this wasn't an accident. This was a decision, a choice they'd made every single day, and I had been the only one who didn't know. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. Start talking, I said, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. My parents exchanged a look, the kind of look that spoke volumes without a single word. And in that moment, I realized something else. Whatever they were about to tell me was going to change everything. The silence between them stretched long enough to feel like its own kind of answer. My mom looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together the way she always did when she was overwhelmed. My dad rubbed his face slowly, like he was buying himself time, like the right words might appear if he waited long enough. But there were no right words for something like this. There was a time, my mom finally began, her voice fragile, before you were born, when things weren't good between us. I let out a short, humorless breath. That's a start, I said. Keep going. She flinched slightly, but nodded. We were separated, she continued. Not officially, but your father had moved out. We weren't speaking much. There were a lot of problems. I glanced at my dad. He didn't argue, didn't correct her, just sat there, staring ahead, his jaw tight. And during that time, she said, her voice dropping even lower, I met someone. The words landed exactly how I expected them to. Still, hearing them out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. How long? I asked. It wasn't long, she said quickly. A few months, maybe less. It wasn't serious. I laughed again, but there was no humor in it. It was serious enough. She closed her eyes briefly, like the truth itself was painful to hold. Yes, she admitted. The room felt smaller. And when you and Dad got back together? I pressed. Her lips trembled. I didn't know I was pregnant yet. I swallowed hard, piecing it together. But when you found out, I said slowly, you knew there was a chance. She didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. Yes, she whispered. That single word carried years of silence inside it. I turned to my dad. And you? I asked. You just accepted that? His eyes finally met mine again, and this time there was no avoiding it. I didn't know for sure, not at first. But you suspected. He nodded once. There were doubts. Doubts, I repeated, the word feeling too small for what it actually meant. And instead of finding out the truth, I said, my voice tightening again, you both decided to just pretend? It wasn't pretending, she said quickly, stepping closer. We chose to raise you together, to give you a stable home." "A lie," I corrected. "A family," she insisted, her voice breaking. "We gave you a family." I stared at her, trying to understand how she could say that with so much conviction. "You gave me something built on a secret. That's not the same thing." Tears slipped down her cheeks now, but I couldn't focus on them because my mind was still catching up to everything else. "What about him?" I asked suddenly. They both froze. "The man," I clarified. "My biological father." The word felt strange in my mouth. Foreign. "Does he know?" I asked. My mom shook her head quickly. "No, he doesn't." "How can you be sure?" "Because I never told him." The simplicity of that answer made my chest tighten all over again. "You just erased him?" I said. "It wasn't like that," she replied, but her voice lacked confidence now. "Then what was it like?" I demanded. She hesitated, and once again that hesitation said more than any explanation could. "It was easier," she admitted quietly. "At the time, it felt easier." Easier. I turned away from her, running my hand through my hair as frustration and disbelief twisted together inside me. "So let me get this straight," I said, pacing slightly now. "You had an affair, you got pregnant, you weren't sure who the father was, and instead of finding out, you both just decided to raise me like nothing happened?" "It wasn't that simple," my dad said again, his voice firmer this time. "Then make it simple," I shot back, "because right now it sounds exactly like that." He stood up slowly, and for the first time there was a hint of something stronger in his posture. Not anger, something more complicated. "We made a choice, a decision to move forward together." "At my expense," I said. "No," he replied immediately, "for your sake." I shook my head, unable to accept that. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to decide what was for my sake when I didn't even know what the truth was." His jaw tightened again, but he didn't argue, because he knew I was right. "What about Nadia?" I asked after a moment. My mom looked at my dad, then back at me. "Not exactly, but she picked up on things." Of course she did. Nadia had always been observant, sharp in ways that cut deeper than people realized. "She asked questions when she was younger about why you looked different, why your father treated you differently sometimes." That stung more than I expected. "So she figured it out," I said. "Not completely, but enough to form her own ideas. And you never corrected her." My mom's silence was answer enough. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself again. "So, all these years," I said, my voice quieter now, "she's been treating me like I don't belong, and you just let it happen?" "We didn't think it would go this far," my mom whispered. I almost laughed again, because that seemed to be the pattern. They didn't think, they avoided, they hoped things would fix themselves. And now, here we are. "Do you even hear yourselves?" I asked. "You didn't think it would go this far. You built an entire life on a secret and expected it to just stay hidden forever?" No one answered, because there was no answer. I stopped pacing and looked at them both again, really looked at them. For the first time, they didn't feel like my parents. They felt like two people who had made a series of choices that led to this moment. "I need to know who he is," I said finally. My mom's eyes widened slightly. "What?" "My biological father," I clarified. "I need to know who he is." Her expression shifted immediately to something closer to fear. "Why?" she asked. I stared at her, not understanding the question. "Because he's part of the truth,
and I'm done living without it." She shook her head quickly, stepping back slightly. "It's not that simple. That was a long time ago. He has his own life now, a family, maybe." "So," I interrupted, "that doesn't erase me." "It could complicate things," she insisted. I turned a step closer, my voice steady but firm. "My entire life is already complicated because of a decision you made. The least you can do now is be honest." She looked at my dad again, silently asking for support. But he didn't step in this time. He just watched. And after a long moment, she broke. Her shoulders slumped slightly, like the weight of everything she had been holding finally became too much. "I don't even know where he is now," she admitted quietly. "We lost contact years ago." "That's not what I asked," I said gently but firmly. "I asked who he is." She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, there was no more avoiding it. "I'll tell you," she said, and something in her voice told me this next truth was going to hit harder than the last.
My heart started pounding again, but this time it felt different, heavier, slower, like it already knew whatever was coming next wasn't going to bring relief, just another layer of truth I wasn't ready for. My mom didn't speak right away. She moved to the couch and sat down, like her legs couldn't hold her up anymore. My dad remained standing, but he didn't interrupt. For once, he seemed willing to let her carry the weight of the truth alone. I stayed where I was, waiting. "You were never a mistake," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence in a way I didn't expect. I blinked, caught off guard. "That's what you're starting with?" "Yes," she said, looking up at me, her eyes red. "Because no matter what you think right now, you need to hear that first." I let out a slow breath, trying to stay focused. "Then tell me the rest." She nodded faintly. "His name is Farhan," she said. The name settled in the room, unfamiliar but somehow heavy. "He wasn't just someone random," she continued. "We knew each other before your father and I even got married. We were friends, close friends." I frowned slightly. "Then why didn't you end up with him?" Her lips pressed together for a moment. "Life doesn't always follow the path you expect," she said quietly. "My family didn't approve of him back then. They thought your father was a better match, more stable, more acceptable." That word stuck with me. Acceptable. "So you married Dad?" "Yes." "But you still had feelings for Farhan?" She didn't answer immediately. "I tried to move on," she said finally. "I really did. And for a while, I thought I had." I glanced at my dad again. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted slightly. Not surprise, not anger, just familiarity, like he had heard this story before. "But when things got difficult between us," she gestured faintly toward him, "I ran back to something that felt familiar, something that felt safe." "And that was him," I said. She nodded. "For a short time," she added quickly. "It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I thought would lead to anything permanent." "But it led to me," I said. Her eyes filled with tears again. "Yes." The word hung between us. "And he never knew?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "No. When your father and I decided to try again, I cut contact, completely." "Just like that?" I said, disbelief in my voice. "You didn't think he had a right to know?" "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared of losing everything, my marriage, my family, the life I had built." "So you chose silence," I said. "Yes." "And Dad agreed to this?" I turned toward him again. He finally spoke, his voice low. "I agreed to raise you. That was the only part that mattered to me." I studied him carefully. You're avoiding the question, I said. Did you know there was a chance I wasn't yours when you made that decision? He held my gaze this time. Yes. The honesty hit harder than I expected. And you stayed anyway, I said. Yes. Why? The question came out before I could stop it. He paused, like he was searching for the right way to explain something that didn't have a simple answer. Because I had already made my mistakes, and walking away again would have made things worse. For everyone. For you, I corrected quietly. He didn't deny it. I nodded slowly, accepting that. So I was, what? A responsibility? A consequence? No, my mom said quickly. You were our child. Not by blood, by choice, she insisted. I didn't respond to that because I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me wanted to reject it completely, to say that a choice built on a lie didn't count. But another part of me, the part that remembered birthdays, school events, quiet dinners, didn't know how to erase all of that so easily. Still, something didn't sit right. What about Nadia? I asked again. My mom hesitated. 2 years after you, she said. I nodded. So she is his, I said, glancing at my dad. Yes, my mom confirmed. That explained more than I wanted it to. The difference in treatment, the subtle distance, the unspoken divide. It wasn't just in my head. It had always been there. Did he ever treat me differently on purpose? I asked, my voice quieter now. My mom looked at my dad, waiting. He took a breath before answering. I tried not to, he said, but I won't lie, it wasn't always easy. That honesty hurt more than a lie would have. At least you're honest now, I said. He nodded slightly, accepting that. The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't just tension. It was the weight of everything that had been said, finally settling. There's something else, my mom said suddenly, her voice hesitant. I looked at her, my chest tightening again. What now? She hesitated, like she wasn't sure if she should continue. Just say it, I said. She swallowed hard. The reason Nadia said what she said, it's not just because she guessed, she admitted. I felt my stomach drop slightly. What do you mean? My mom's eyes flickered toward my dad again before returning to me. She overheard us, she said. I froze. How old was she? I asked slowly. 15, my mom replied. 15. Old enough to understand. Old enough to form opinions. Old enough to turn something like that into a weapon. And you just let her keep that to herself? I said, a bitter breath escaping. We told her not to say anything, my mom said quickly. We made her promise. I let out a bitter breath. And you trusted her with that? We thought she would understand, she said. I shook my head. You gave her the one thing she needed to always feel superior, and you expected her to handle it maturely? My mom didn't respond, because she couldn't. And all those years, I continued, my voice tightening again, every comment, every joke, she knew exactly what she was doing. No one argued, because it was true. I turned away, running my face over my head. Everything felt different now. Not just the present, the past, too. Every memory had shifted slightly, like the truth had rewritten the meaning behind it. I need some air, I said finally. I didn't wait for a response this time. I walked toward the door, my thoughts racing again, but now they were sharper, more focused. Because this wasn't just about what I'd lost. It was about what I'd never been given. The truth. And now that I had part of it, I wasn't sure I could stop. Because there was still one thing left. One person. Farhan. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, but it didn't calm me. If anything, it made everything clearer. I had a name now.
And that meant something else, too. This story wasn't finished yet.
The air outside felt colder than it should have. Or maybe it was just me. Maybe everything inside me had shifted so much that even something as simple as stepping out of the house felt unfamiliar. I didn't get into my car right away. I just stood there, staring at nothing in particular, letting the silence settle around me. Farhan. A name I had never heard before, yet somehow it now carried more weight than anything else in my life. I repeated it quietly under my breath, trying to make it feel real. This is your father. The thought didn't land properly. It didn't connect, because how do you suddenly replace the idea of a person who's been there your whole life with someone who doesn't even know you exist? I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. I needed to think, but thinking wasn't helping anymore. It was just making everything louder. I got into my car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel without starting the engine. My reflection stared back at me from the windshield, faint, distorted, but there. For the first time, I didn't see familiarity. I saw questions. Who did I get my eyes from? My smile? My habits? The things I liked, the things I avoided, were they mine or were they inherited from someone I had never met? It felt like pieces of me had been taken away and replaced with blanks, and the only person who could fill those blanks was out there somewhere, living his life completely unaware that I existed. The thought made my chest tighten. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before I typed the name into the search bar. Farhan. It was a common name, too common. Dozens of profiles appeared, faces I didn't recognize, lives that had nothing to do with me. I scrolled slowly, hoping for something, anything that felt like a connection. But there was nothing. Of course there wasn't. I didn't even know his last name. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes for a moment. This was going to be harder than I thought. And yet, I couldn't let it go, because now that I knew he existed, ignoring it felt impossible. I needed more than just a name, more than just a story. I needed something real. I opened my eyes again and started the car. Instead of going home, I drove aimlessly at first. The roads blurred together as my mind kept circling the same questions over and over again. Eventually, without fully realizing it, I found myself pulling up in front of my parents' house again. I stared at it for a moment, surprised by my own decision. I had just left, but something inside me knew. I wasn't done. Not yet. I stepped out and walked back to the door, this time with more urgency in my steps. When I knocked, it opened quicker than before. My mom stood there again, her expression immediately tense. "You came back," she said. "I need more information," I replied, not wasting time. She hesitated, glancing behind her as if checking whether my dad was nearby. "He's in the other room," she said quietly. "That's fine," I said. "This is between us right now." She stepped aside, letting me in again. The house felt even heavier than before, like the truth we had uncovered was still lingering in the air. We moved into the kitchen this time, away from my dad. "Tell me everything you remember about him," I said. She looked overwhelmed, but she nodded. "His full name is Farhan Ali," she said slowly. "He used to live in the same city as us back then. He worked in a small business, importing textiles, I think." I listened carefully, storing every detail. "Does he still live here?" I asked. She didn't know. "I don't know," she admitted. "After I cut contact, I stopped asking. I didn't want to know." I frowned slightly. "You didn't want to know, or you were afraid to know?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. "Do you have anything?" I pressed. "An old number, an address, anything at all?" She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Not with me," she said.
It's been too long. Frustration bubbled up again. There has to be something, I said. People don't just disappear. She didn't say he disappeared, she replied softly. I said I let him go. The difference mattered, but it didn't help me. I ran a hand over my face again, trying to stay calm. Think, please, this is important. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in her expression. Understanding, not just of the situation, but of me. You're not going to let this go, are you? She asked. No, I said simply. She nodded slowly. Then there might be one thing, she said. My attention sharpened immediately. What? She used to have a box, she explained. Old things, letters, photos, memories from that time. My chest tightened slightly. And? I haven't looked at it in years, she said, but if it's still there, there might be something inside that can help. Where is it? I asked quickly. She hesitated for just a second. In the attic. Of course it was. Buried, hidden, just like everything else. Let's go, I said. She didn't argue this time. We made our way up the narrow stairs to the attic. The space was dim, filled with dust and the kind of quiet that comes from years of being untouched. Boxes were stacked along the walls, some labeled, others not. My mom moved slowly, like each step was pulling her deeper into a part of her past she had tried to forget. It should be here somewhere, she murmured. I started looking too, moving boxes aside, scanning for anything that stood out. After a few minutes, she stopped. There, she said softly. I turned to see her pointing at an old, worn-out box tucked into the corner. Something about it felt significant, like it held more than just objects. She walked over to it, hesitating before opening it. For a moment, I thought she might change her mind, but then she lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs, folded letters, and small keepsakes that had been clearly untouched for years. She picked up one of the photos first. Her expression softened slightly as she looked at it. That's him, she said. My heart skipped a bit. Let me see, I said, stepping closer. She handed it to me, and for the first time, I saw his face. I stared at the photo, my breath catching slightly, because there was no denying it. I didn't just see a stranger. I saw something familiar, something in the eyes, something in the shape of his face, something that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. It was like looking at a version of myself reflected back through time, and in that moment, the truth became something I couldn't ignore anymore. This wasn't just a story. This was real, and I had just found the first piece that could lead me straight to him. I didn't realize how tightly I was holding the photograph until my fingers started to ache. It felt fragile in my hands, like if I gripped it too hard, I might lose the only physical connection I had to the man who was suddenly at the center of everything. I sat down on the attic floor without thinking, still staring at his face. Farhan, my father. The words still didn't feel natural, but it carried a weight that I couldn't ignore anymore. You look like him, my mom said quietly. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't, because she was right. It wasn't identical, not enough for someone to notice immediately, but now that I knew, it was obvious. The curve of the jaw, the shape of the eyes, even something about the way he held himself in that picture, it felt familiar in a way that went beyond logic. How did I never see this? I whispered. Because you weren't looking for it, she replied softly. That made sense. You don't question something you've been told your entire life is true. You trust it until something forces you not to.
I finally looked up at her. "There have to be more," I said. "More photos, letters, anything." She nodded slowly, kneeling beside the box and starting to go through it more carefully. I watched as she unfolded old papers, her hands trembling slightly with each movement. Every piece she picked up seemed to carry a memory she hadn't touched in years. "Here," she said after a moment, pulling out a stack of letters tied together with a thin ribbon. My chest tightened again. "Can I?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded, handing them to me. I untied the ribbon carefully, like I was afraid of damaging something irreplaceable. The paper was slightly yellowed, the ink faded, but still readable. The first letter I opened was written in a neat, steady hand. Her name was written at the top. Not mine, not ours, just hers. I started reading. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic in the way movies make things seem. It was simple, honest, real. He asked about her day, talked about work, mentioned small things that didn't seem important but somehow made the letter feel more alive. And then there were lines that carried something deeper, something personal, something that made it clear this wasn't just friendship. I swallowed hard and moved to another letter, then another. Each one filled in small pieces of a story I had never known existed, a story where my mom wasn't just my mom, but a woman who had loved someone else, a story where my existence was tied to something hidden, something unfinished. "Do you regret it?" I asked suddenly, my voice breaking the quiet of the attic. She stilled. "What?" she asked softly. "Not telling him," I clarified. "Do you regret it?" She didn't answer immediately, and when she did, it wasn't what I expected. "Every day," she said. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. I thought I was protecting everyone, but all I really did was delay the damage. I looked down at the letters again. "And now?" I asked. Her voice wavered. "Now I don't know what the right thing is anymore." I nodded slowly, because I didn't either, but I did know one thing. "I need to find him," I said. She closed her eyes briefly, like she had been expecting that. "I know," she said. I went back to the box, this time searching more deliberately. Photos, old envelopes, anything that could give me more information. Then I found it, an envelope with an address printed on it. My heart jumped. "This," I said, holding it up, "is this his?" My mom leaned closer, her expression tightening as she read it. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's where he used to live." "Used to?" I repeated. She nodded. "It's been years. I don't know if he's still there." It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something, and right now, something was enough. I carefully folded the envelope and slipped it into my pocket. "I'm going," I said. Her head snapped up. "What?" "I'm going to find him," I repeated. "I have to." "It's not that simple," she said quickly, standing up. "You don't know what his life is like now. He might have a family, children, and I'm one of them," I said, my voice firm. She froze. "You don't get to decide that I should stay hidden just because it's inconvenient. That decision already got made once. I'm not letting it happen again." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue because she knew she couldn't. I stood up, holding the photo one last time before placing it carefully back in the box. For a moment, I just looked at him, trying to imagine what this meeting would even look like. Would he recognize something in me the way I had in him? Would he even want to? Or would I just be a reminder of something he had long moved on from? The uncertainty sat heavy in my chest, but it didn't stop me, because not knowing anymore wasn't an option. I turned to leave, but my mom's voice stopped me. "Wait."
I paused, glancing back. "There's something you need to understand," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't speak. I just waited. "He doesn't know you exist, and when he finds out, his reaction might not be what you hope for." I held her gaze. "I'm not doing this for his reaction," I said. "I'm doing it because I deserve the truth." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't respond, not because I didn't hear her, but because I didn't know what to do with that apology yet. Maybe I would later, or maybe I wouldn't. Right now, it didn't matter. I walked out of the attic, down the stairs, and out of the house again, but this time it felt different. I wasn't leaving with questions. I was leaving with direction, with purpose, with something real to follow. As I got into my car, my hand instinctively touched my pocket, making sure the envelope was still there. It was, and with it, a piece of the truth that had been hidden from me my entire life. I started the engine, my heart steady for the first time since all of this began, because now there was only one thing left to do: find him, and finally face whatever came next.
The drive felt longer than it actually was. Not because of the distance, but because of everything building inside me with every passing minute. The envelope sat on the passenger seat like it had its own presence. I kept glancing at it, half expecting it to disappear, like this was all something temporary, something I could wake up from and leave behind. But it didn't disappear, and neither did the truth. The address led me to a part of the city I hadn't visited in years. It was quieter, older, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, where houses carried history in their walls. I slowed the car as I approached the street, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. This was it, or at least, this was where it started. I parked a few houses down, my heart beating steadily now, not racing like before, but heavy, grounded, like it knew this moment mattered more than anything else that had come before it. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just sat there staring at the house. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just a simple home with a small front yard, a gate slightly worn with age, and curtains drawn halfway across the windows. Ordinary. And yet, everything about it felt significant, because somewhere behind those walls, there might be a man who didn't know I existed. I stepped out of the car slowly, closing the door behind me with a soft click. Each step toward the house felt deliberate, measured, like I was crossing into something I couldn't come back from. When I reached the gate, I paused. My hand hovered over it. This was the moment, the point where everything could change. Again. I exhaled slowly, pushing the gate open. It creaked slightly, the sound louder in the quiet street. I walked up to the door and stood there, staring at it. Then, before I could overthink it, I knocked. The sound echoed in my ears. Once, twice, then silence. For a moment, I wondered if no one was home, if this would all end before it even began. But then I heard movement inside, footsteps. My chest tightened again. The door opened, and there he was. Older than in the photograph, of course, his hair touched with gray, lines etched into his face from years I hadn't been part of. But there was no mistaking it. The same eyes, the same presence. For a second, we just looked at each other, strangers, and something more. "Yes?" he said, his voice calm but cautious. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Are you Farhan?" I asked. His expression shifted slightly. "Yes," he replied. "Do I know you?" There it was.
The moment I had been building toward, the question that carried everything inside it. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, "you don't." A faint crease formed between his brows. "Then how can I help you?" he asked. I took a breath. This might sound strange, my voice steadier than I expected, but I think I'm your son. The words hung in the air between us, heavy, unavoidable. His face didn't change immediately, but I saw it, the confusion, the disbelief, and then something deeper. "That's not possible," he almost instinctively said. I didn't think so either, until recently. He studied me more closely now, his eyes searching my face, looking for something. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope, then the photograph. "I found this," I said, holding it out to him. He hesitated before taking it, and as he looked at it, everything shifted. His expression changed slowly, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "My mom. They were together years ago." I didn't say her name right away. I didn't need to, because something in his expression told me he already knew. He looked back at me, really looked this time, and I saw it again, that flicker of familiarity, the same one I had felt when I first saw his photo. "This," he started, his voice uncertain, "doesn't make sense." I know. It didn't for me either. He stepped back slightly, as if he needed space to process. "Come inside," he said after a moment. I hesitated for just a second, then nodded. The house felt warm, lived in, different from the one I had just come from, but in a way that made something in my chest tighten again. We sat down across from each other, the space between us filled with questions neither of us fully knew how to ask. "She never told me," he said finally, almost to himself. "I know," I replied. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. "And you're sure?" he asked, looking up at me again. I nodded. "I took a test. There's no connection to the man who raised me." That seemed to settle something in him, not completely, but enough. He leaned back slightly, still studying me. "This is a lot," he admitted. "It is," I agreed. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't as heavy, because now the truth was out in the open, not hidden, not buried, just there. "What do you want from me?" he asked after a while. The question was direct, honest, and I appreciated that. I thought about it for a moment, about everything that had happened, about the anger, the confusion, the betrayal, and then about what I'd really been searching for all along. "I don't know yet," I said truthfully. "I just needed to know where I come from." He nodded slowly. "That's fair," he said. We sat there for a while longer, talking, not about everything, not yet, but enough to begin. And as I listened to him, really listened, I felt something shift inside me. Not a replacement, not a sudden sense of belonging, but something quieter, understanding. Because the truth didn't erase my past, it didn't undo the years I had lived, the memories I had built, or the relationships I had known. But it did give me something I never had before: clarity. Later, as I stood to leave, he walked me to the door. "This doesn't have to be the last time," he said. I looked at him, considering that. For the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel lost. "I know," I replied, and I meant it. because this wasn't an ending, it was just a different beginning. As I walked back to my car, I thought about everything that had happened, about Nadia, about my parents, about the life I had lived and the truth I had uncovered. And I realized something important. I wasn't anyone's mistake. Not hers, not his, not anyone's. I was simply the result of choices, complicated ones, flawed ones, but choices that didn't define my worth. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't need anyone else to prove that to me. Not anymore.